Good morning, and welcome to the fourth meeting of the year of the California Commission on the State of Hate. I want to call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. The closed captions can be displayed in English or another language, which will allow you to view an automated live transcript of the meeting in another language, including Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. To display closed captions on your screen, please do the following. Click the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you'd like to display captions in another language, select the box at the bottom of the window labeled Enable Translation. You will see a window with the heading You've Enabled Translation at the top. Select English as the speaking language and select your preferred language in the second menu, then click Save. Automated captions in your selected language should start appearing at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will send instructions in Spanish in the chat. Let's now move on to our roll call to establish a quorum. Deputy Director Watts.
All right, Chair Roybal,
Present.
Vice Chair Salcedo, Commissioner Che,
Present.
Commissioner Cuellar, Commissioner Damsky.
Good morning, present.
Good morning, Commissioner Filer,
Present.
Commissioner Levin,
Present. Hello, everybody.
Commissioner Sanar,
Present.
and Commissioner Southers, I believe is not here.
Thank you. A quorum is established for this meeting of the commission. Now let's move on to reviewing the agenda. You may view the agenda by visiting the commission's website, calcivilrights.ca.gov/Commission on the State of Hate. You can also find the commission's website by putting California Commission on the State of Hate in any search engine. Then when you get to the site, click on the button labeled Meetings and Agenda. We will send the link to the agenda in the chat. And just a couple of items will be to review the agenda. We'll be approving the minutes of our last meeting. We'll have a continued discussion on the commission's annual report. We'll do chair and subcommittee updates. Then move on to any commission member announcements, then public comment on items not on the agenda, a reminder about calendaring future agenda items, and then we will adjourn the meeting. So that will be our time together today. As we move forward with the agenda, I want to remind everyone about the process for public comments. First, this commission is a public body, and an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public. To that end, this meeting is open to the public, and there will be opportunities for public comments throughout the meeting today. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have comments that are not specifically related to an agenda item, please save your comment for the agenda item titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. To submit a written public comment, you may email the commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We'll be monitoring this channel throughout the meeting. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it when the public comment portion of the agenda item is open and before any vote. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during the agenda item titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so during public comment portions of the meeting. You may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand on Zoom. If you are joining on a computer, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. During the public comment portion, we will call on attendees who raise their hands to allow them to unmute and deliver comments. For anyone joining us in the room in Los Angeles today, you may submit a written comment by emailing us or by writing your comment on a piece of paper and handing it to Shanna Hart, our staff in the room today. to deliver a verbal comment, please raise your hand and we will unmute the room. In the interest of time, we will limit verbal public comments to 3 minutes per person. During that process, I will give you 3 minutes and then let you know when you have 1 minute left. Now, let's move on to approval of the minutes. We'll now move on to approval of the minutes from the last commission meeting and the community forum. The minutes from the last meeting and the forum are attachment A. We will post the link to the chat in the chat to download attachment A from the commission's website. Is there any discussion on the minutes from the last meeting or the community forum? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the last commission meeting and the community forum?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Damsky. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Filer. Any further commission discussion before we move to public comment?
You know what? I realized I was not at the forum, so I think I need to remove my motion.
Okay, so the motion is withdrawn. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the community forum and the commission meeting. Commissioner Levin, I see you.
Approved. Thank
Make the
you.
motion to approve both. Is there a second?
So moved.
Second by Commissioner Filer. Any further commission discussion?
Chair Roybal, if I had to depart the meeting early, is there, should I be abstaining from the approval? And I guess this,
I don't think there is a requirement around that since you were
Okay.
there for a good portion of it.
okay, thank you.
And Chair, I will be abstaining since I missed the forum.
Great.
Uh,
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky.
Chair, could
Commissioner
we at a later time, because I didn't even think of this until Commissioner Che brought it up. But I think going forward, I'd like the commission to examine whether we should do that or not. For
What
later-
will we just chatted about?
Correct.
I think, why don't we ask staff, Deputy Director Watts, can you check in with counsel at the Civil Rights Department and give us a recommendation for the next meeting around if someone is only partially at the meeting, if they can participate in voting to approve?
But also our authority to make our own bylaws. I love CRD, but when we started this, we didn't know where we were going to land. And I think it's important for us to be able to make our own rules and not have them imposed by CRD unless there's some overriding reason to do so, which there may be, like expertise, for instance. But at times when we can have autonomy, not only within our commission, but also with respect to other commissions too, I think we have to assert that.
It's interesting discussion.
Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to suggest in the future, since these notes are actually for 2 different meetings that occurred at different, one was in the morning and one was later on in the day, that if we do have 2 meetings on the same day again like this, that they have separate minutes.
That's a good suggestion. We can do that for the future.
Thank you.
Monica, can you note that for the future for the minutes?
So we would do 2 voting approvals. As
No,
if-
the motion right now is just to approve both of them.
yeah.
But for the future, we'll separate the minutes and we'll do 2 separate votes.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Is there any public comment on the minutes from the community forum or the last commission meeting? All right, seeing no public comments, we'll move on to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the commission meeting and the community forum will call the roll. Deputy Director Watts.
Chair Roybal,
Aye.
Vice Chair Salcedo, Commissioner Che,
Aye.
Commissioner Quillard, Commissioner Damsky,
Abstain?
Commissioner Feiler,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Sinar,
Aye.
Commissioner Southers. So we have 5 ayes, 1 abstain.
The motion passes. Great. Let's move on then to our next agenda item, agenda item number 3 on the agenda, discussion regarding the commission's annual report. The way that we'll handle this section is staff will do a briefing on some sections that were asked about at our last commission meeting. So we'll go ahead and do those 3 separate briefings on pieces of the report. Then Alec will probably start before that walking through the process for further edits or changes to the report. I want to thank all the commissioners who submitted edits around the report and suggestions around the report. I think the staff incorporated most of those, but Alec will review that. And then, of course, I want to thank the staff of the commission, Alec, Monica, Rebecca, and we have a new staff member. Now I'm forgetting Kevin's last name.
Kevin Thomas.
Dr. Kevin Thomas, who you'll get to meet at the next meeting. Dr. Thomas couldn't be with us today, but we have another staff member. So I want to thank the staff for really doing such great work on the report and getting to where we are now. And again, to the commissioners for all of your feedback. Deputy Director Watts, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the second draft of our second annual report. I'm going to start by providing a high-level summary of the changes we've made to the report, and then we'll move on to substantive briefings of various sections of the report. So since the last meeting, we made a few edits to the report based on your feedback in that meeting and also the written feedback that you provided. In the version that you have before you, we have essentially marked areas where we made significant substantive changes using the comments feature in the document. But I'll just go over sort of like as a high level summary, the changes that we've made. So first, you might notice that we've made copy and line edits throughout the report. I think we're going to be continuing to do that. But just to let you know that has happened. We started by kind of marking each part where we edited, and we've just done it throughout the report, so it just made more sense. Just to let you know that there are copy and line edits throughout. Moving on to significant changes that we made. I'll start with Chapter 2, Patterns and Trends. In response to your feedback, we moved the discussion of hate related to the conflict in the Middle East to its own section and reframed how we talked about the conflict. Thank you for your feedback on that. We also added information about hate on college campuses, including UCs. We also added a summary of city level patterns in hate in California, courtesy of Commissioner Levin's data and his help. And we also added information about the unhoused population experiencing targeted violence. So that's in Chapter 2. And again, these are all kind of noted in the document, but this is just a high-level summary. Chapter 3 on resources and support, we made edits to the section describing law enforcement collection of hate incident data. I think this was in response to Commissioner Sinar's comments. And we also spelled out the potential risks of this practice. Chapter 4 related to prevention. We made a few edits. We emphasized that the studies summarized in the section. Many of the studies should be interpreted with caution given the gaps in the research studies. Other edits we made where we discuss intergroup contact. We discuss additional conditions for enhancing the efficacy of intergroup contact. We also provided additional information about restorative justice. And we added a section related to influence of leaders and others who are sort of perceived as high status in a community and their influence on promoting anti-hate public messages. In the appendix, we moved technical information about the CHIS. That's our survey. We moved that technical information to the appendix. We also added a summary of legislation chaptered in 2023 to the appendix. So that's kind of the high level summary. I do, and we can kind of talk through that, but I do want to make sure that we have time for the briefings. So in response to, I believe it was Commissioner Sonar's suggestion that we have sort of short briefings and an opportunity for discussion on some of the substantive content in the report. We put together a few briefings for you today. Everything we'll discuss today during the briefings is in the report, but we'll just go over today to review it and answer any questions you might have and kind of have a discussion. So we identified 3 sections for the briefings. The first 2 briefings are the 2 sections in chapter 4 that provides information about prevention and intervention. They are labeled programs and interventions to prevent hate in schools. This section begins on page 70. We're also going to give you a briefing on public messaging as a tool for prevention. This begins on page 95. And then we'll end with a briefing on the section labeled Resources and Support in the Aftermath of Mass Casualty Events, Lessons Learned from the Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay shootings, which begins on page 49. So let's start with the first briefing, Programs and Interventions to Prevent Hate in Schools. And again, this starts on page 70 if you want to follow along. So for this first briefing, we are joined by our research consultant, Sarah Wilf, with UCLA's Initiative to Study Hate, which is one of our research partners, if you remember. Sarah has experience as a program evaluator for nonprofits and was an analyst with the Mathematica Policy Research Institute, I believe. She researches how young people gain the awareness and agency to take social and political action. And she did some incredible work reviewing the research on programs and interventions to reduce hate in schools, reviewing just a ton of studies and doing a very rigorous job reviewing them. So Sarah, I am going to turn it over to you to get the briefing started, and I'll pull up your slides.
Thanks so much, Alec. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the efficacy of K-12 school-based anti-hate programs and interventions. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we know that schools are places where young people are experiencing hate, such as hate-based bullying, hate speech, and hate crimes. And FBI data from 2022 on the right shows that hate crimes in schools are actually increasing. At the same time, schools are ideal settings to implement anti-hate programs. For example, they already have long-term relationships with children and their parents. And in addition, many schools are public institutions over which the state has oversight. So the goal of this project was to understand the efficacy of K-12 school-based anti-hate programs by examining peer-reviewed evidence. So essentially, we were asking the question, what programs and interventions work at reducing hate in K-12 settings? In terms of the process, we looked at several literatures to answer this question, including education, psychology, sociology, public health, and political science. We looked for rigorous peer-reviewed studies that assessed the effectiveness of these interventions in K-12 settings. And we looked at outcomes that measured reductions in hate or similar outcomes such as prejudice and stigma-based bullying. And we included both qualitative and quantitative research. So based on the research, the most effective anti-hate programs in schools use a combination of several mechanisms. For example, intergroup contact, where students either have direct or indirect contact with students from different groups. Social and emotional learning, which teaches a broad range of skills, including empathy, perspective taking, and self-reflection. And knowledge and awareness interventions, which ensure that students are knowledgeable and aware about the existence and history of hate and its negative impacts on people. There are also several promising programs aimed at transforming the entire school. So for example, there's anti-bullying programs that have reduced student aggression. Restorative justice has been shown to improve school climate and reduce bullying rates. And then there's other interventions like youth-led social action projects or action civics that can increase students' awareness about hate and empower them to tackle social problems. However, a caveat with these programs is that hate-related outcomes specifically for these interventions have not yet been assessed in the research that we reviewed. We also identified several best practices for implementing anti-hate programs in schools. First, interventions that are spread out over longer time periods show stronger effects. So a few hours a week over several weeks or a quarter instead of a 2-day workshop. Interventions should also be developed with specific age groups in mind. So, for example, intergroup contact interventions appear to be more effective with younger children, whereas knowledge and awareness interventions may be more effective with adolescents. School staff implementing these programs should receive adequate training. And then finally, the interventions that schools implement should be evidence-backed. So they should use the mechanisms described earlier that research shows are most effective. Further, research shows that interventions utilizing multiple mechanisms are most effective. So for example, an intervention might use intergroup contact in combination with social and emotional learning rather than just using one mechanism. And finally, we'll conclude with some recommendations for policymakers, schools, and researchers. The first recommendation is that schools should monitor the impacts of these programs and collect data on important outcomes, such as hate crimes and bullying rates. Schools could partner with researchers to add hate as an outcome to existing studies. Importantly, more research is needed to understand the impacts of these programs on marginalized students. It's important to consider how these programs could have impacts on them and to monitor their experiences. For policymakers in schools, it's important to ensure buy-in from core stakeholders, in this case, like principals, parents, and teachers, before implementing programs that are potentially controversial. And finally, for all stakeholders, there are multiple nonprofits already implementing programs in thousands of schools across the US that theoretically could reduce hate, such as Roots of Empathy, Generation Citizen, Facing History and Ourselves. But unfortunately, there is scant peer-reviewed research on these programs in general, and specifically on hate-related outcomes. So in our research review, we're recommending investments in additional research and efforts to bridge schools, these nonprofit programs, policymakers, and researchers. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I think we could open this up to questions and discussion if there's any questions or discussion.
The questions or discussions with regard to this past presentation or the report in general?
That's my question as well.
Oh, sorry. Let's focus on, I think, Sarah's presentation and the section on schools while she's with us, and then we can let her continue with her dissertation writing, and then we can discuss the report.
Yes, can I compliment it? Just for a second. Recent surveys are showing, this is in Inside Higher Ed, for instance, out of Chicago, are showing precisely what she's talking about. Not only are students, now this applies to college, but nevertheless, the findings that she has illustrated, I think, are important to be noted. And that is, very briefly, it's not only the substantive fear and certainly aggressive engagements that have occurred, right? So let's separate that out. But it is also how we are communicating with each other and how educational institutions can be places where this kind of communication and restorative justice starts. So I just wanted to just compliment you as someone else who does this research all the time. Thank you so much. And it's also reflected in a brand new article by Dr. Hussein Ibish today in the National. So literally, this kind of information is applicable to events that are occurring across a spectrum. So thank you so much, particularly with empathy building, restorative justice, and communication. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Wilf. I particularly wanted to acknowledge your recommendation that ethnic studies classes receive buy-in from stakeholders. I'll be talking a little bit more about this in particular when we have discussion on the report itself. It's an issue that I think is really important for us to talk about in our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dansky. Commissioner Che.
Well, I just want to also thank you for your research and the presentation. I had wondered in your research, because I have many colleagues who work in school-based settings, that often the issue is interest and will, but the lack of resources and capacity and continued support to pursue alternatives to suspension, such as restorative justice. And so do you have any insights into that, or what is the literature saying about that? Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question and an important point. It came up tangentially in some of the studies I was looking at, but I did not focus specifically on resource constraints in schools.
I can chime in too, just to make sure I understand, Commissioner Che, you mentioned your question is kind of the resources required to implement these programs, correct? Okay, just a few things to mention. I think one thing that we added in the report related to restorative justice, and I think this is in response to Commissioner Sanara's guidance, is that, when we consider the costs and the resources required to implement these systems, we have to kind of weigh them against existing systems. So, current systems also require resources to implement. And so the idea is that we need to have a sort of apples to apples comparison rather than thinking of it as an additional cost. I think Sarah and I were also talking about that some of these recommendations can be implemented in a very sort of straightforward way. So for example, to the extent that a school collects data on bullying or incidents of bullying, is that data kind of disaggregated to understand hate-based bullying or incidents where we believe there might be somebody was targeted because of a characteristic. And so that's just a matter of kind of breaking up the data and looking at it in a different way. Another thing to think about too is some of these programs are actually happening in schools anyway. And this is kind of related to my first point. I think, part of the reason we embarked on this review is that there's quite a few programs out there. And so we really wanted to turn to the literature to say, okay, if a school was going to invest resources in a program, what might they want to consider? And what does the evidence say about providing guidance to schools when they do this? So, but that is a good point. And I think Commissioner Dansky has raised this point too, related to the resources required to implement these programs.
Yeah, could I also clarify, and thank you so much, both Sarah and Alec. There's also the capacity issue given teacher shortage, the mental health crises amongst the student population. So I'm also talking about it within that context too. And so, there's a lot that can be discussed around that, but in addition to that, and also lack of resources on evaluation. So that there are programs in place, but they don't have the resources to evaluate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Filer.
I'm sorry, I don't know are we talking about the report or we're still talking about the presentation we just
The
had?
presentation. We'll get there once we get through the 3 briefings, then we'll have the general conversation about the report.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today and for this important information and your contributions to the report.
Thank you, Sarah.
Director Butts.
Okay, I'm going to pull up some more things for you for the next 2 briefings.
And welcome, Deputy Director Monroe and Director Kish. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Okay, great. So we will move on to our second briefing, Public Messaging as a Tool for Prevention. This is a summary of the section that begins on page 95. Before I begin, I want to commend Naya Hardaway, who is a PhD and JD candidate at Stanford University and who led this work. She unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. So the goals of this project, we'll start with sort of how we define public messaging in this context and kind of set the stage here. So for the sake of this project, we define public messaging somewhat broadly as communication initiatives in public and online spaces to bring attention to a problem and attempt to intervene. We know that anti-hate public messages are actually quite common. For example, we often see posters addressing hate and statements posted on social media. And so in the annual report, we kind of review a sample of some of these anti-hate messages and the goals around them and what they kind of look like. And these messages have various goals, right? So some are targeted at spreading awareness about resources. Some of these messages are aimed at providing other types of information, or in some cases, it's attempting to sort of shift the dialogue or culture to reduce or prevent hate. So we decided to turn to the research and ask, what does the research tell us about how public messages could be used to actually prevent hate? In other words, if someone were to design a public message with the explicit goal to try to prevent hate, how should they frame it? What sorts of evidence-based principles should they keep in mind? So to answer these questions, we partnered with Naya Hardaway to review peer-reviewed research related to this topic. And we primarily focused on two bodies of research that seem to speak to this topic most clearly. One body of research is related to preventing and reducing interpersonal biases, and the other is looks at the role of norms and social norms in influencing behavior. So from that review, we learned a few things. First, as with any body of research, there are certainly gaps, and we discussed these gaps in the review and encouraged the reader of the report to interpret the studies with caution. So a few of the gaps that are worth noting here is that many of the studies that we reviewed looked at sort of short-term effects rather than long-term effects of interventions. There's also some evidence that the effect size of some of these studies might actually be relatively small. They might have a relatively small impact. But when we view all these studies together and examine where the findings converge, what we see is that these findings point to general directions or what we call guiding principles for designing public messages targeted at preventing hate. So from our review, we developed 8 evidence-based guiding principles. Because of the gaps in the literature and because we know that prevention initiatives some prevention initiatives might work better than others in different contexts, we don't provide sort of one-size-fits-all recommendations. Instead, we provide these sort of what we call guiding principles that we argue can kind of point to specific directions for people to consider when they're designing these messages. So I don't think we'll have time to go through all of these principles today, but I did want to highlight just a handful of them to give you a sense of what some of these are. So I'll start with, these are marked with an asterisk actually. So 2, 4, 5, and 8 I want to talk to you about today. So game with number 2, encouraging empathy and perspective taking. The reason we recommended this is that there are quite a few studies demonstrating how exercises that encourage understanding the perspective of a specific group can actually support policies that help that group. And I'll kind of explain one example. So in the report, we summarize a study that was pretty groundbreaking. It was conducted in South Florida. And in this study, they examined the effect of perspective taking on anti-transgender prejudice. And in the study, canvassers went door to door to hundreds of potential voters in South Florida and asked the voters to engage in perspective taking for about 10 minutes. Specifically, they asked voters to talk about a time when they were personally judged negatively for being different and then encouraged the voter to see how their own experience might allow them to understand the experiences of transgender individuals. And in a follow-up survey, what the researchers found is that the exercise substantially reduced transphobia and significantly increased support for a law protecting transgender people in a 3-month follow-up. And I say this is groundbreaking because we often don't see this, that an effect is both significant, it shifts your ideas, your perspective on a policy, and also lasts for months afterwards. And And so when we think about this finding within the context of perspective taking, it's a little bit in the context of public messaging, it's a little bit, it's a little bit challenging to think of how this might work, but we provide some ideas in the report, and such as providing sort of compelling narratives or stories that encourage people to consider the perspective of groups that are targeted. Which kind of brings us to the second principle that I wanted to talk to you about. This is actually number 4, employing narrative stories and entertainment. The reason we included this principle is we found quite a few studies documenting the influence of stories, fictional characters, and celebrities on reducing prejudice. And I think, we're familiar with this kind of, strategy. The idea behind this intervention is that there's evidence that stories tend to be less confrontational when you're dealing with kind of controversial issues, and more persuasive than messages that rely on sort of direct argumentation. And so in this report, we suggest kind of implementing some of these principles through stories and narratives. For example, if video, you could create a video and post on social media describing a story about the experience of a member of a group or community who has experienced hate, and sort of encourage perspective taking through that story. The third principle I wanted to talk to you about is, number 5, on emphasizing and aligning descriptive and injunctive norms. This is a bit jargony, so we spell this all out in the report, but I'll do my best to summarize this here. So essentially, we reviewed research that looked at how emphasizing cultural norms can influence behavior. So we found that emphasizing the frequency of a behavior, which researchers refer to as a descriptive norm, may inadvertently signal that the behavior is somewhat acceptable given its frequency. For example, in a public message that states something like 1 in 4 Californians experienced a hate incident, is the underlying message that hate incidents are relatively frequent, and as a result may be tolerated by society to some extent. I know this is a controversial thing to say, but we suggest that it might be better to emphasize positive descriptive norms when designing a public message to prevent hate, and to align the descriptive norm with what we call injunctive norms, which refer to what people in a society approve or disapprove of. So just bear with me, I'll give you an example. So if we wanted to create a message that has a positive descriptive norm and an injunctive norm, it could be something like 95% of California residents value an inclusive California and support creating a California free of hate. Therefore, California has implemented a resource line to report hate when it occurs and connect victims of hate to resources. Obviously, this message could be wordsmithed a bit, and we're still thinking about the exact language to use, but you get the idea.
Alec, can you repeat? You cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that last piece? Your mic went in and out. Can you repeat that last 2 sentences that you said?
Sorry about that. I'm just checking my internet connection. Yeah, it should be. Okay, let's see where I ended up. Did we get to the example? Okay, so the example that we provided is 95% of California residents value an inclusive California and support creating a California free of hate. California has implemented a resource line to report hate when it occurs and connect victims of hate to resources. And of course, this isn't perfect. We know, we're still working on kind of examples of what these messages could look like. And we're actually talking to researchers who have implemented a sort of message like this on college campuses and found that it was successful. So we'll continue to work on this. The last principle I wanted to discuss with you is to consider the messenger and the audience. We actually added this principle since the last report. I think this was in response to perhaps Commissioner Sonar's comment. I'm not sure exactly, but the 4th key principle is to consider the messenger and the audience when designing these messages. This principle was designed based on the research that documents the influence of leaders and people who are generally seen as high status in a society on behaviors. So in the report, we summarized results from studies finding that messages from leaders and other people who are viewed as high status can lead to more sort of pro-social attitudes. For example, there was one study where the researchers conducted a series of nationwide surveys in 2019 and 2020 where they examined whether anti-violence messages from either Biden or Trump could actually reduce support for violence among the survey respondents with strong partisan identities. They found that messages of anti-violence from either Biden or Trump actually reduce support for violence among partisan respondents, regardless of whether that respondent was a Democrat or Republican, which is, I think, quite significant in a few ways. One, the fact that this had an impact, and two, the fact that either Republican or Democrat could hear a message from Biden or Trump and be influenced in terms of reducing their support for violence. I think it was a very compelling study in that sense. There is the caveat that the message from Trump had a stronger impact than Biden among Republicans, but it still had an impact, and I think that's what's important. They also found no differences in the impact of the Biden or the Trump message on reducing support for violence among Democrats, which is really fascinating. So this study and others led us to develop the guiding principle for public messaging efforts to consider the messenger and the audience to leverage the influence of leaders in messaging campaigns. So that's the briefing on public messaging. I think maybe we should pause for a second because I know I threw a lot out at you, but I'm happy to answer any questions and can have a discussion.
Questions. Before we get to Commissioner Sinar, I just want to, that last piece around the messenger and the audience tracks with what Commissioner Levin has been telling us around the data that when political leaders try to tamp down things like President Bush did after 9/11, that has a significant impact. So it's consistent with what I think Commissioner Levin has been sharing with us over the last 2 years. Commissioner Sinar.
Thank you, Alec, and also giving thanks to Naya and Sarah and the other researchers who helped with these sections of the report. On the public messaging point, I think what I like about how this version of the report deals with these questions is that it makes clear that there are a lot of unknowns and makes sort of appropriately qualified and measured comments based on the research. And I think that's really important. So even the point that Alec was just noting about maybe there might be a tension between messages about the prevalence of hate, where they clearly have a purpose in terms of pointing out the prevalence of a problem, how urgent and important it is for government and for society to address a problem given its scale and how it affects people in communities. And at the same time, we want to make sure that our messages on how prevalent something is doesn't actually indirectly contribute to making it seem like the norm in a society in a way that might normalize it or indirectly encourage it. And I think that same tension or question about how do you talk about problems without sort of indirectly contributing to them is found in other contexts. Like there's this whole debate over how do you talk about youth suicide and how do you do it in a way that points to the problem and at the same time doesn't encourage copycat incidents. And so it's a really important question. It's challenging. And I think that the report is very careful and measured about addressing it and not actually making so much of a clear and specific recommendation because I don't think we can, but in terms of just saying that this is a potential tension that we need to think about in terms of the messages and which audiences we're sharing the kinds of messages that talk about just how prevalent hate activity is, and maybe the pairing it with messages on the inclusive attitudes in society might be something to think about, but without making a recommendation that goes beyond what we can say at this point. So I just wanted to say that and to compliment the staff in trying to get it right.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate looking at this aspect of public messaging as part of our toolkit for preventing hate. I have to say, the part that really stuck out for me was the messaging about if 25% of people are victims of hate crimes, or we say 1 in 4 people, it can be easy to say, well, that's not all that many people, so why should we be concerned? It actually hit me really hard. I found it kind of horrifying to think that it might, pointing out a statistic like that could actually be used to minimize the impact and the importance of preventing hate. So I really want to appreciate staff for bringing this forward and giving us the opportunity to think about how might we better bring that message forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Commissioner Levin.
Bravo. I wish I had this kind of experience at baseball games. What great players we have contributing to this report. And that, by the way, thank you so much about the public messaging. You're welcome to use any charts I have, just cut and paste them. I am not the app king like the younger folks are, but you're welcome to use it or not use it in any way you see fit. What I think is interesting, and what I think is so important, just give me 1 second. This is really important. I don't think people understand the lengthy and intense level of research where sometimes you have potholes in the road, sometimes you have detours, and sometimes you have gaps where you have to use Occam's razor. But nevertheless, the information on public messaging, at least in certain contexts, I think shows us, going back to what we've been hearing from Ms. Wilf, which was just such a wonderful presentation, is oftentimes people are talking at each other where they're seeing different messages. So I think where we're at now is there seems to be some kind of support, I certainly do, with regard to positive public messaging around the details, more research. But also we know that Dr. Robin Williams from Cornell said a printed circuit of stereotypes label who are appropriate targets for aggression. So when there is silence, what fills in the void, or when there's lack of communication structurally, what fills in the void are these kinds of visceral and aggressive messages, which, forget about the substance of them, have currency. Real briefly, talking to another sociology PhD from another state, they're watching what we're doing, by the way, just so you know. Director Kish, thank you for allowing this mix of chefs in the kitchen that sometimes can produce people who are bringing different perspectives to things. But what we are seeing here, I think, is such a beautiful contribution from not only established scholars, but from scholars who are newer in the field and bring with them this perspective. So one of the things that we know, when President Bush spoke after 9/11 and spoke about how attacking women in hijabs, I just did Religion News Association. It is un-American. And what we're seeing now from the limited data that's coming out, I'll talk about in another segment. We have to address the public nature of this prejudice, as well as the breadth. Last point. It was no accident. Certainly it's a correlation, I get it. But when Ron DeSantis made such horrifying statements about Gazan Palestinians in toto, the very kind of textbook prejudice which we tried to rise above, a 6-year-old was stabbed within the next day. So, we can have gaps in research, but what my father would say, who sat Shiva for a month because I didn't go into medicine, is we don't have to check our common sense at the door. And I think we have to apply these norms to what it means to be a community. And that's what the scholar in the Midwest told me. He said, in the past, we had these kind of Rotary clubs or Kiwanis clubs. Now the way we engage online is much more tribal and factional. So not only the substance of how we communicate, but what high transmitters are going to assist those of us who are trying to be the peacemakers. This is such important research. Thank you, every one of you. I know what a pain in the neck it is to do this on this kind of unconscionable deadlines that I put you under by helping draft the legislation. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Feiler?
Yeah, I really do appreciate this. A lot of this, when, because of my background in psychology, when you look at family psychological theory, the modeling of parents, the way that they model in a family influences how children will be in the world. And I think when you look at our leaders, they're sort of the parents to the country, and the kind of modeling they do will trickle down to the behaviors of the rest of the population when you look at it from a family theory perspective. So I think this is really important. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Feiler. Deputy Director Watts?
Okay, should we move on to the second briefing unless there's additional questions?
Sure.
I see a raised hand.
Nope.
Okay.
He was just left over.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, thank you for the questions, everyone. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of a turn for our third briefing, and we'll cover this section, resources and support in aftermath of mass casualty events, lessons learned from the Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay shootings, beginning on page 49. So as we are all aware, this year we observed the 1-year anniversary of 2 shootings that impacted the Asian American and Latino communities. Immediately after the shootings occurred, the Civil Rights Department staff from the Community Conflict Resolution Unit and California versus Hate joined community-based organizations and law enforcement to support impacted individuals, families, and community members. The shootings were ultimately deemed not to be hate crimes. They did activate many of the same systems that activate in response to a hate-based mass shooting, which provided a window into the effectiveness of those systems and some of the gaps. So the commission staff worked with Crew and Deputy Director Monroe to essentially download what they learned in their experiences and understand the lessons learned from responding to those events. So those lessons are in the report and on the screen now, but I just want to give you a sense of what some of those lessons are, and I'll just talk through a few of these. So I'm going to skip to number 3, related to affected individuals need a continuum of services. The reason we included this is that staff observed that after a mass casualty event, impacted individuals and their families and also communities need access to a very broad continuum of resources and services, some of which may not necessarily be intuitive to folks. So on one end of the spectrum, clearly there's a need for trauma-informed, culturally competent mental health services after these events. There's also a need for legal assistance on really a range of legal matters. But there's also things needed, such as specialized assistance obtaining visas for family members flying in for funerals. We also observed that communities had a lot of informational needs, such as what are the tax implications of donations? How do I arrange a funeral at somewhere that is, I think, culturally sensitive? How can I access public benefit programs? So really making sure that the response addresses this broad need, I think, is really important. Moving on to, I think, number 5, resources and services should be available in languages other than English. I think this was another significant gap that we observed, and I know the Subcommittee on Policy Recommendations has been discussing this as well. So in the report, we explained that nearly 1/3 of California's population is born outside of the United States, and a majority of immigrant families speak languages other than English in the home. So we emphasize that any government response really should prioritize language access in a number of ways, including providing impacted individuals and families access to skilled interpreters and translators, ensuring all government communications, such as press conferences, public statements, resource guides, all of that is available in the languages and the dialects of the affected communities. We also point out that it's important to ensure that there are contacts and navigators in the languages and dialogues of the communities that are affected. And the idea here is to really make sure that we're minimizing handoffs. So if somebody contacts someone who doesn't speak their language, they don't get dropped to some extent. We also emphasize that it's not simply enough to have interpreters and translations. The governments also need to make sure that they are skilled and appropriately trained, especially given the complexity and importance of the information that they're conveying. And then I'm going to skip to lesson number 6, streamlining access to resources and services, because I think this is also really important to emphasize. So we point out in the report that there tend to be a number of responding entities after mass casualty events, especially high-profile events, which can make navigating resources and services challenging for victims. So we provide some ideas for streamlining access. For example, I think on a most basic level, developing a resource guide and working with CBOs to develop the resource guide and distribute it to appropriate communication channels is one approach here. We also discussed the importance of implementing a no wrong door policy among responding entities, especially at all levels of government. I think there's a really compelling example of this. And I know Becky's on the line, so Becky, you can feel free to jump in, but I know that staff learned about the concerns about the tax implications of the GoFundMe donations for the shootings and was able to contact the Franchise Tax Board through our connections to understand those tax implications and provide that information to CBOs collecting the donations. And so that's, I think, a really good example of a no wrong door policy. So in this section, the lessons that we learned are essentially policy recommendations here. But we also end with a specific policy recommendation to implement a sort of statewide response team that could build the infrastructure to address many of these gaps that we describe in the report. So that's a heavy section. I'm happy to answer any questions or have a discussion. I also know that, I don't know if Sin, I know you responded to this event too, and Becky also responded, so feel free to jump in.
I just wanted to thank Commissioner Che for, I mean, a lot of these recommendations come from what we learned from the leadership that she had and that CAA had in Half Moon Bay in particular, but also the work that they're leading through the policy team. The one thing I wanted to emphasize is these are all lessons that we learned from community leaders. So it is consistent with sort of the model we have for California versus Hate and Others, is that we need to learn directly from the leaders. So in Monterey Park, it was really some extraordinary leaders, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Southern California, who led a lot of this work to bring people together. And I think the whole no wrong door term, which we also took from Commissioner Che, and I think is a really important model. It sends the message that, all aspects of our government, we are here to serve the needs of people wherever they come to us. And so when people are in the throes of an extraordinary trauma like this, the last thing we should be doing is, if they come to the wrong state agency, is saying, sorry, not us, go somewhere else. And I think the recognition that this can, and I think Alec, you said this perfectly, it can be incredibly difficult to navigate all of these systems in the best of times. But when you're trying to confront issues around burial and kind of just getting through the day, we as state agencies owe it to people who reach out to us to make sure that there truly is no wrong door. And that was, we were able to do that. And I think, the last thing I'll say is that as a state agency, our role in this case, and I think often, is to sort of be behind the scenes and follow the lead of the community leaders. So, with Monterey Park, it was Asian Americans Advancing Justice SoCal that was getting people together and helping to flag the issues that we needed to address. And we can often do that quietly and behind the scenes and just make sure that we're lifting up the communities that are most targeted. So I'm going to turn over to Commissioner Che, who we learned so much from in compiling some of these lessons too.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. Commissioner Che.
Well, this is a moment to express mutual admiration and appreciation. I think that the most significant lesson in all of this, these series of tragedies, is that in a crisis moment, that is not the time to try to figure out, the language issues and which agencies and so need to be activated. And so this idea that there that we take these tragedies and we identify based on our own experiences what has happened and what was really needed is, I think, so incredibly important. You know, I think that for me, this was a moment where I think as a commission, I always think about impacted people. And I think about the multiple barriers that some members of Californians don't have equal access. And because of this political environment, there's actually a real barrier to seeking services, to actually seeking resources. And I think that that's really important to note, especially for members of our community that have mixed immigration status, who may be undocumented. And of course, this was the case for the migrant farm workers, for some of them. And I think to have both government and community-based organizations knowing that and working together to address those in a compassionate way and in a responsive way is just so critical. And then I think finally, I just want to just say on a positive note, I've had a chance to come into contact with a lot of the, in particular, the Chinese migrant workers, and they're still struggling with the mental health issues for sure. But I think one message that they've shared is how incredibly grateful to have received the information and resources, and to be, you know, to feel like they weren't alone in the aftermath of such a tragedy, to have both government and community-based organizations really holding them and being invested in their full recovery and healing. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Filer.
Yeah, and maybe I missed this. Do we have like a mental health crisis team that is ready to go when we have these kinds of incidents? Do we have anything set up like that?
There are some emergency sort of services that come in. It's not from the Civil Rights Department, but from other parts of our state. But I would need to get back to you to give you exactly sort of specifically on mental health emergency services. I know that there are a lot of people in the state who are working on those issues, but I think it's a really important question, Commissioner Filer, because it just comes back again to the extent that there are those services, how accessible are they? Are they sort of, you know, not only language accessible, but culturally competent? So I can get back to you about what that looks like. I can just, because it's hard for me not to, I will just plug the, you know, California versus Hate. When we respond, we certainly do. That is one of the number one kind of requests we get for services and mental health services. And again, we do that in part through networks with organizations like, you know, Chinatown Services Center, for example, others that provide direct services. So, but I can follow up, Commissioner Filer, and sort of find out exactly what procedures look like.
And just for your information to know, I know UCLA and UCSF and UC Riverside, there's a partnership that's happening to create a more statewide resources utilizing our UC incredible talent and knowledge. So that might be something for us to really look at. And they're doing it with the Steinberg Institute. Is it Steinberg up in Sacramento? Because it seems like it would be important to have like a team ready to go to respond.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Levin. Are you okay?
When we were putting together this commission before the legislature, I was asked specifically what would be the parameters. And I said, we have to be careful not to have a mechanistic application that does not take into account realities, resources, and talents that we have before the commission. There was a Supreme Court case about how far should civil rights laws be interpreted. And the Supreme Court in the 60s said, as broad as a sweep as required. So what I am saying to you is, someone whose community in San Bernardino experienced a horrible mass shooting. This is exactly what the heck this commission is supposed to be doing. Yes, we're looking at campus hate of different sorts. And yes, we're looking at anti-transgender aggression. But when vulnerable communities that bring with them particular needs are not highlighted, the response does not take it into account, does not take these people into account. So I just, I'm sorry, and I'll do it all frickin' day. But this is what the commission was designed to do. This report, the level of participation from both community and academia, this is what we wanted. And I wanted to thank, darn it, best trade from DC since the Padres, Becky Monroe. Look it up on Google, folks, home gamers. And also, Commissioner Che, thank you so much for doing this. These important lessons, hopefully, the tragedies that occurred, if there's anything that when responders and communities try to help, Fred Rogers, look for the helpers. People, look at other states. Look what they're doing to communities that are hit by gun violence. Look at what's happening to religious communities in other states and the leadership. When we're having these kind of reports that cover everything from religious-based hate to immigrants, to the disabled, and there's currently an assembly bill on that. It matters. So don't believe everything you see on cable television. We're bringing, sure, there can be gaps in some of the research and people will point it out, but we are bringing current information that comes from a diverse set of perspectives that hopefully will help victims. Commissioner Che, Deputy Director Monroe, bravo, thank you. And you know what? It deserves to be noted. So we'll take that time because these people are working so hard. They are putting their guts into this, whether it's the Civil Rights Department folks or these commissioners. The best of California is here before you today, and I want to give you a heartfelt thank you to every single one of you. Bravo. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Deputy Director Watts, is that it for the briefings?
That's it for the briefings.
Great. So let's move into general comments about the report. I know some of you have them. So if you will raise your hands, I will call on you. Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, hi. Wow. I've never seen any document or panel that was of value that was put together that didn't have this interchange. My son, who's the journalist, spoke to a famous editor recently, and he said, you grow. And this commission has grown, and I hope everybody's noticing it. And so has CRD by being, I mean, oh my gosh, it's like the cousins who set up the whole Thanksgiving for you, so thank you. Couple of things. I think we need to add at least three things. One, the latest information on anti-Muslim hate, which just came out within the last month. We have to. Also, a recent advocacy group report on anti-Jewish, but got to put big disclaimers. You might even want to analyze just certain parts of it. For instance, one group is reporting a record number of anti-Muslim hate crimes. We haven't seen that. 9/11 was horrible. But it's like we're talking about different categories, like different hurricanes. Anti-Jewish hit a record as far as police data. That has to be noted. We are seeing generational grief in the Arab, Muslim, and Jewish community. By the way, great stuff that was added to it. Also, just came out yesterday, okay? And I wish Dr. Southers were here because, we have certainly seen people who have been canceled over threats or disruptions and things like that. Salam al-Mariyati from MPAC, I think today, came out with an excellent statement about the Constitution must be more than words. And yes, before I get more hate mail, and please don't send me, like, it makes you look like a fool when you send me stuff saying that I support Hamas people, okay? I don't. And neither do most of the people that I run into, okay? So don't send me that. But what we are seeing is, read Dr. Ibish's article today in the National. Go to @Prof. Levin. We are seeing a kind of response to non-Christians that is, and Dr. Ibish pointed this out, in dehumanizing different sets of folks, that follows this playbook of racial and religious intertwined bigotry. So when we're having records and we're having big increases in anti-Muslim, thank you, Religious News Association, for letting me present over 3 decades of anti-Muslim and Arabophobic hate crime last week. We have to do that. We also have to do disclaimers. But look, you're not going to get anybody upset if you say bomb threats against Jews went from 90 to over 1,000, 1,009. Okay, that's not controversial. And when we look at the inside higher ed, nearly identical groups of Muslim and Jewish students feel fear for their safety. 16% of students overall. So one of the things that I think was important, and this is why, you can see what's happening here. The commission has matured. We've matured. We have to make sure that we honor, and I think Dr. Ibish put it so well, that yes, there are things beyond the pale. I'm not talking about that. People who encircle Jewish students or who yell Yahud and all this kind of stuff. But most of these protests have been nonviolent. And I think it's a mistake to count these protests a priori as being some kind of hate incident. So we're going to have to approach this data very carefully. But I think when we're seeing generational grief, as well as people reporting in social surveys, all kinds of socio-behavioral experiences based on this trauma, that some of the lessons that we found from things that weren't hate, for instance, will become useful when we use that tool to say to communities, all communities, as the governor said, and I'll paraphrase him, and I never speak for the commission, but on this one, I think I can do it because the governor said it. To our Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian Californians, you belong here. And to my friend Salam al-Mariyati, yes, those words in the Constitution apply. Unpopular ideas apply. I'm so proud of my son and what he did at the Cornell Daily Sun with his editorial about criticizing folks who want to cancel messages that they don't like. By the way, though, I come from the same point of folks who would invite Ahmadinejad or even people that have conspiracy theories. They should be allowed. They wouldn't be my first choice. But I think one of the things that we can do, and I'll close on this, and I discussed it, well, I don't want to give their names, but one of the things about being involved for a quarter century in interfaith, and Becky knows it. These folks are your friends. They're your family. And what we're seeing is we are not having a template for discussion. So at the very least, let's fall back to 2 things. One, that students are feeling fear, and that we have seen both aggressive type of things, but also things where folks have been canceled. And I'm sorry that Dr. Southers isn't here because I wanted to talk about it. At the same time, I do want to say a quick thing about putting this in context. FBI director just yesterday was warning about basically an increased threat level. So I think one of the best ways that we can do this is get the data out, but to present it in a way that says, and as Dr. Abulesh, the Gazan physician said, when he looks at people, he sees them first as people. And as I said during multiple talks to both Jewish and Muslim groups, keep inviting me. I can go now. I'll be back east talking to a bunch of them. You belong here. You're important. And whatever data, even if that it is flawed, and even if there are differentials, and there are, Muslims are more afraid to report to authorities than other groups, Pew 2017. But I think it's important that we include data from these groups. It's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be people who are going to write all kinds of things. But when we complement it with other types of data, social science data, as we're doing now, I think it's very important. I want to salute, again, another bravo, another home run, but this is almost impossible because we don't know what's going to happen going forward. I am very concerned when you speak to students from both sets of groups. They're in fear and they're talking past each other because the messaging is misunderstood. So some of the things, for instance, I was talking about with Dr. Ibis, and that he would do is go to different universities presenting different points of views. What we have to do is incorporate a structure. And again, something that my son wrote in the Daily Sun that incorporates the community voices as well, and have that structurally in there, along with an appreciation, not only what it means about the mechanistic application of First Amendment law, but what it means to be a member of a community. We cannot have, nor will I tolerate, Jewish, Muslim, Israeli Americans, Palestinian Americans, or students at all. We're talking about 2 to 3 million people, according to the Inside Higher Ed, that are feeling this fear of their safety. We have to maintain the civil liberties and respect for all people who abide in our state. And I'm going to make sure, along with, I know in my heart, the rest of these commissioners and the rest of the staff of the Civil Rights Department, to make sure that we carry out that, so that both a valedictorian and the head of the Jewish Studies program at Cal State Long Beach, in a discussion about peace, can both be heard, irrespective of what any of our personal opinions are. As I said during the MPAC conference, my tribe is one of recognizing the dignity of all human beings and the civil rights of everyone that abides in our land. I want to thank the commissioners for letting me say this, but when we're talking about public messaging, when you've taught for over a quarter century, and you have had students tell you they've been called a terrorist, or another student say that they're afraid to walk through a thoroughfare, it sculpts who you are. And we have to maintain, just as our governor and the head of this department and the attorney general, this is so important that all of us stand for the rights and the dignity of every Californian. And this is what happens when you put together a commission that represents the best of our state. Once again, fellow commissioners, thank you. And one last point, if there's anything that I can do when I go to DC to talk to the people there next month about getting reports from non-law enforcement, you can, let me tell you something, the surest bet you're going to find in this state right now, let's not get a Dodger Padres, surest bet right now is when I go to DC, I am going to, as loud as that Gideon's trumpet can do, compliment the California versus hate. And guess what? It is spreading. I'm just talking to folks in Illinois who want to do similar things, but we need more federal funding. These people are working as hard as they can for us in the Civil Rights Department, as are these commissioners. And I want to assure the people in our state that we take these concerns of fear and also civil liberties very seriously. All you have to do is just change the name or change the topic and see if you would be as concerned with a limitation on speech with one versus the other. That being said, I think it's important structurally, and universities are missing this, to set up educational and empathetic conduits by which we can talk to each other. When I talked to Dr. Izzadine Abulesh, who went on Israeli television in 2008, as his apartment was getting shelled and he lost children, that changed my perspective on things. We have to humanize people. And I'm not running for office, but after decades of doing this, I'm going to tell you something. We now have an infrastructure. Becky knows it. We wouldn't have passed the COVID-19 Act if we didn't have Arab, Palestinian, Jews, and others pushing for this, and we're not going anywhere. Look for the helpers. Fred Rogers, we have them, but we must in the media and we must in our academic institutions promote, as Dr. Ibish wrote today, those two principles of both free expression, but also making sure that all our students know that they belong and they know that the institutions of our state are behind them. Now we have to, as Salam said, make these words on paper become a reality. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Levin, you're a hard act to follow. I want to thank the staff and our guest presenter for the presentations that we had this morning, and also for the edits that have been done to this report since we last looked at it as a commission. I appreciate the inclusions and the clarifications and the additions. There's one thing that stands out for me in section 4. It's on page 78. The second paragraph up from the bottom, which starts talking about the requirements for ethnic studies courses for high school graduates. I'm not quite sure how to include this because we're having some real challenges with adopting this in California, with actually enacting it. What happened, for a little bit of history for those who may not know, is that there was an original version of the ethics studies curriculum that was submitted to the governor. There was a lot of concern raised by various communities in the state about that curriculum version, for either omitting them or being biased against them, and the governor rejected that version, required a second version to be written, which is the one that our state has approved. However, the people who wrote the original version are now shopping it around the state, school board by school board, pressing for its adoption, and it has been adopted in various school districts. So I think it's important to include this information in our report somehow as a concern. And I can provide more backstory on that to our staff as needed after this meeting for including that material. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Sinar, you're on mute.
Thank you. So I want to say just maybe a word about the ethnic studies curriculum, but it's not something that I have explored at length. So, but just sort of from what I know about the history, and I think Commissioner Damsky is certainly right that the ethnic studies curriculum has been the subject of a lot of debate. I know that the current version, which was approved by the governor, is felt by Palestinians as erasing their history, and they perceive that the current version has censored out anything related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. I know that the earlier version had attracted a lot of concern from Jewish American groups, and getting this right is challenging, but I don't think that we should address it in the report in a way that would approve of the exclusion of any community from that curriculum. So that's kind of all I wanted to say about that at this moment. But about the report itself and the form in which it's taken, I wanted to just begin again by commending the staff. I thought they did an incredible job responding to the feedback very thoughtfully and materially addressing the comments. And there were a lot of comments, and I just appreciated the care with which they addressed it. I also think that the staff has taken a lot of care and thought in terms of addressing the very sensitive issues around the Israel-Palestine conflict and the impact it's had on a lot of communities here in California. And in general, I think the way that they have made sure to include effects on all communities is really important and significant. And so I wanted to also commend that. I did want to point out a suggested edit, which I think is important to one sentence related to the framing of the conflict. And some of you may recall that in our last meeting, there was a short discussion about a sentence in the report that I think had said something to the effect of the conflict which began in the Middle East on October 7th and was vague about what triggered that conflict or the subsequent events. And I think Commissioner Damsky rightly pointed out that the kind of vague and non-specific framing was leaving out what happened on October 7th. So I think the new version of the report mentions in particular by name the attacks by Hamas in Israel. And that sentence, though, moves from there to address what had happened since in a similarly problematic, vague form, similarly meaning without naming anything after that, except to say that it was a subsequent escalation of conflict in the Middle East. So I'm looking at the sentence on page 18, which says, beginning in October of 2023 and continuing into 2024, communities across California have been experiencing a wave of hate coinciding with the tragic attacks by Hamas in Israel on October 7th and the subsequent escalation of conflict in the Middle East. I think it's important to use at least the words, the Israeli military offensive in Gaza. It doesn't take a lot to say that. It doesn't take any more of a position on foreign policy than we would want to say, but to not include a specific reference to the fact that there has now been a 6-month Israeli military offensive in Gaza, which is actually the subject of much of the tension on college campuses and much of the pushback, given the colossal loss of life resulting from it. At least it needs to be said that it's not just a generic escalation of conflict in the Middle East, but a pairing of the attacks by Hamas in Israel and the subsequent Israeli military offensive. So I would advise that we include that. Otherwise, it does seem like we are leaving out even mention of what's been happening over this time period. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Filer.
Commissioner Sinar, I'm going to disagree with you on that. And if we're going to change the language in those two sentences, I would then say that we need to say a terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas, if you want to get more specific. So to me, I feel like those sentences kind of handle it in a way that's fair to all sides. I'm also concerned that in the report, there was no mention of attacks, physical attacks to Jewish students on UC campuses. I think that needs to be included to have a balanced report. And there was, like offhand at Berkeley, 2 students that were physically attacked, and you can actually go to ADL to find more incidents of that. So those were my concerns. And if there's going to be changes in the language of how we address the war, then I think we have to have other words put in there as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Brown from the DOJ.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay, and my camera is giving me problems this morning. But just to Commissioner Damsky's earlier comment, it might be an option would be that the State Board of Education, as well as our office, issued public guidance on AB 101 dealing with the ethnic studies curriculum, and perhaps a link to those two letters might be a good way to highlight this point. I know certainly in our guidance, we do chronicle some of the issues with the initial model curriculum that was evaluated and replaced with the current curriculum. And we also note that districts and school boards have the ability to enhance what the model curriculum does to provide a variety of lessons that include other groups: Filipino Americans, Arab Americans, Sikh Americans, Armenian Americans, so that they can see that it is actually more expansive in terms of what the law actually requires as it relates to AB 101. Our letter does go into the rises in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in educational settings as well. And so it could be a balanced way of highlighting the issue and also raising awareness to the fact that we, as a law enforcement agency, are monitoring the implementation of AB 101 to make sure that vendors like the ones that Commissioner Damsky mentioned, who have peddled some of these discriminatory curricula, that is also something that we are evaluating and warning it against in terms of their adoption as they lead up to the final date of implementation. So that's just a suggestion of a way to just sort of provide external resources that weigh in on that issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Brown, I really want to thank you for that information. Is it possible, if it's possible for you to forward links to those letters to our staff? I think that would be really helpful. I'm interested in seeing those myself, and I wasn't aware that the Department of Justice was tracking this implementation and providing some guidance. So thank you on that. I also want to concur with Commissioner Filer's comments about the section about the Israel-Hamas war. I think the way it is phrased is appropriate. It's a little more expanded than what we had initially. I think to alter it in the way that Commissioner Sinar recommended could be inflammatory. I don't want our report to be considered inflammatory. For that reason, I also did not recommend that we talk about describing Hamas as a terrorist organization. So those are my comments on this at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Commissioner Sinar.
Thank you. So just to return to the point about language, the edit that I proposed was, I think, as neutral as you can get in terms of describing the military actions in Gaza. So including the words "an Israeli military offensive in Gaza" is actually the most neutral way that you can describe what has happened over 6 months. I mean, I don't know that there's any factual way of saying, I mean, there's no, just the idea of not being able to say that there has been such an offensive and that is what a lot of the campus tensions and tensions in our community is about, seems to me to be just a denial of fact. So my suggested edit was not to call it a genocide, although there are both federal district court and ongoing international proceedings on that. It was not to use the kind of language that people can debate around in legal fora. It's just to describe that there is an Israeli military offensive in Gaza, which is part of the issue. At this point in time, 6 months after October 7th, when 30,000 people, at least half of whom are children, have been killed, 80% of the population of Gaza has been displaced, every single university in Gaza has been destroyed, most of the healthcare system has been gutted, and the entire population is at imminent risk of famine. I think that as a commission whose mission is to focus on hate and to prevent dehumanization, it is in fact dehumanizing not to be able to even refer to the Israeli military offensive in Gaza.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Che?
I want, I'm trying to figure out how to recognize this is a really difficult set of discussions we're having right now. I actually want to go to process, which is I don't think it's fair to ask the staff to try to address what is being raised here. And I think I would like to suggest that perhaps there is a smaller committee to recognize the points. There's an issue around facts. It's also about framing. And I think that in many ways, I think the way the language is now could also could be perceived as inflammatory to Palestinians. So I just want to name that without in any way diminishing, I think, the perspective that adding more context and information would also be harmful to the Jewish community. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that we can't actually put this on the staff to try to come up. And I just want to recognize too that this is an issue that is affecting so many organizations. And we're seeing this playing out in the university setting, and rightfully so. I think this is something that we have to contend with. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get it right to everybody's satisfaction, but we have to engage in this in the most principled way. And that I think we'll really have to go to process. So I just want to name those components because and how difficult this is. But I would also be concerned with keeping the language as stated in the report.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Levin?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I understood what Commissioner Che said. You talked about process, but about the language, what was your proposal? I didn't quite understand.
Well, I would also have concerns about keeping the language as is.
Got it. Okay.
So what I would like is for us to, I'm not sure we're going to be able to resolve this at this commission meeting. And so that's why I wanted to go to process and making sure everybody has an opportunity to weigh in without putting it on the staff solely.
Let me, on that note, Commissioner Che, one of the things I was going to do when our discussion was complete is I've spoken with the staff, and one of the things that we were going to propose to the commission was that the as far as the next steps on this process would be that we would vote to move the report forward to the governor's office. I think, as you all recall from our last report, once it was in its final form, it went to the governor's office for review. That is still the process that has to happen before the report is published. And so in speaking with the staff, one of the things that we talked about was in terms of a process. So let me kind of talk about what I was going to propose and then see how the commission reacts, which is that we would vote to approve this version and delegate any additional changes to the staff and the chair and the vice chair, and that the staff are still working on additional copy edits to the report, that if there were substantive changes that needed to be made, that I would work with staff to consult particular commissioners or subcommittees on incorporating those changes. That's what we were going to propose to you today as a process moving forward. Commissioner Chase, since you brought up the process, do you have any reactions to that?
I think that given the weight of this conversation, it seems like it would, I know for myself, I think it would be difficult to vote to approve this version of it and passing. And again, I understand the desire to move forward because, of course, the governor's office needs time to review. So I think if there's some kind of an amendment where, yeah, I'm just open to hearing what others have to say, but I know that for me, being a representative on the commission, that would be hard for me
Sure.
to do at this stage, yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think that I think that you are right, that this needs more discussion, and that I think the process that had spoken with the staff probably needs some amendment in terms of moving forward for us to be able to engage in a conversation around that. So what I would like to do for the moment is to continue to hear from the commissioners whose hands are raised. And then we'll take a break because we're at 10:41. And then come back to have a conversation. It'll give me a little bit of time to think about how to move the process forward. And it may not be that we vote to send it to the governor's office today, but that we come up with another plan to be able to have a more in-depth conversation about this and to be able to check with staff around it. So how does that sound? So let's hear from the rest of the commissioners whose hands are raised, and then we will take a break and then we'll come back and engage in that conversation, and of course get any public comment that might be pending. Commissioner Damsky.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Damsky, before we Commissioner Brown, you have your hand up. Did you have a comment, or is it just that you had not taken your hand down?
I will remove my hand. I
Okay, great.
apologize.
Thank you. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you. I really want to thank Commissioner Che for your remarks. It's easy as a member of one of the communities that personally has a stake in what's happening with this conflict and how it's being framed to be, I want to use the word partisan, but the word I want really, it's being one-sided or one-minded. And what you reminded me of, Commissioner Che, is that all of us here in our respective communities have allies in this commission who want to uplift what's in the best interest of all of us. So that really touched my heart. I really want to appreciate you for bringing forward the idea that we might have a different process about this. And as a result, I want to suggest something really daring for this section of the report, which might be something along the line that there are different narratives being put forward by the respective communities. That the Palestinian community views it as this way, the Jewish community views it not as a military offensive, but a military defensive. And so, in highlighting those very different perspectives, we don't have to limit ourselves to defining what the conflict is, but to recognizing instead that there are different ways that it is being perceived, and that is what's impacting our communities at this time. So I want to thank everyone for their patience with this process and discussion, and for helping me personally think through it in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Commissioner Levin.
Thank you. I just wanted to defer to you there because you had an actual relevant point about process. Hey, here's an idea. Why don't we act like a commission? Okay. If the governor wants to do what he's going to do, we serve at his pleasure. I understand that. But I'm gonna tell you something. One of the things I wanted was to have some kind, particularly now, and because I don't know where this rule came from, but like when we were running for things, we only got 1 minute. So Nazis get 3, but people running for, we have to make our own rules about things, people. Okay? That now process, that can be part of it. What I'd like to ask though is, what is offensive about the phrase Israeli military offensive? Would Israeli military response be better? But you know what? There's nothing wrong with accuracy. So I don't want to offend people. I always want to use the most gentle approach I can. But I'm curious as to what is inaccurate about either, and why shouldn't we vote on it? And if the powers that be want to change it, that's fine. But what it shows is democracy in action, people. We're not at each other's throats. We care for each other. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to model for what other places should do by not wanting to hurt people's feelings, but in an honest and sincere question, particularly when we're seeing voices being canceled. And I don't like any. I saved the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan from getting his butt kicked because I believe in the dignity of all people, and that was a stretch even for me. But what is inaccurate or offensive about that statement? I'm asking that as a sincere person who's an empathetic person, because to me, I felt a similar kind of like dancing around facts. But maybe I have a blind side that I'm unaware of. So if somebody could tell me what is offensive about those words, or would Israeli military response be better, or than that, but I think it's important for us to discuss things, not by virtue of outcome, but Commissioner Che, like, double cherry on the sundae today, because the manner in which you approach this was not only outcome, but process oriented. And again, I want to come back to, we're a commission. I don't like the proposal because it leaves out, like, frankly, like Jewish and Muslim members of the commission from that. And that's why, I think it's a good idea to have this kind of diversity. But I'm curious as to why we can't vote on this now. This is not like, a scientific analysis of ivermectin. This is looking at lexicon. And I do think it's something we shouldn't put on the Civil Rights Department. We put enough on them. So if anyone could address that, I'd really appreciate it, because I think we can resolve this as a commission. And by the way, I think we should, because I think we need to stand up to other commissions. When I want to go and say, like, I want the Civil Rights Department, California versus hate thing, people are going to know it's not just because I like everybody there, which I do. It's because I really believe it works. So let's act like a commission. I want to hear people's points. I right now have a rebuttable presumption to go with the phrasing, as Commissioner Sinar said, unless there's something I'm really missing factually or with respect to offending community. Look, even today, a hostage video has been put out by Hamas. I want to be so sensitive. We have 5 American Jews that are being held hostage. We have an Asian woman whose Chinese mother is dying of brain cancer. We have bombings of civilians in Gaza. Can we enter this where we know, and this is what's great about our maturity, we care for each other. So that's where I'm coming from. So just want to hear what you say.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Filer? You're on mute, Commissioner Filer.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Sinar, I just want to acknowledge what you said. And I do think this is a really important discussion, and to really understand the depth of the pain. And I think Commissioner Levin, you kind of talked about it, the generational trauma that gets triggered. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors, so I think there's a lot of emotionality that is triggered for me in this conflict. So Commissioner Sinar, I want you to know that I do really, and I'm going to have tears, have such pain over the loss of life for the Palestinians and what's happening in Gaza. but I do feel that sentence is important, and I'll say why it is for me. If you wanted to say Israeli response or defense, that would feel more comfortable to me, and to my community. I think that there is a lot of, from both sides, generational trauma that's getting triggered. And we just cannot deny it that. And I think even, I do like what Commissioner Damsky said, maybe we need to acknowledge that the two perspectives and instead of trying to merge it all, that we do really understand as Californians why this is so difficult and trickling down to the enormous pain our students are feeling. Because you do have these generational wounds, and you do have a lot of strong responses from two communities that feel like they are being persecuted at this moment. So Commissioner Levin, to me, saying defense or response would feel more comfortable. But I do feel like what Commissioner Damsky said was a really interesting way to approach it. And I want to say to you, Commissioner Sinar, I hope you understand that in no way am I diminishing the pain your community and people of the Palestinian community are going through as well. But this is very triggering for me, and that's an emotional thing. It's not a logical thing.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Let's take a break. It's 10:51. Let's break until 11, and then we'll come back and pick up this discussion. And in the interim, I'll chat with staff about how we will, or options for moving forward. And then when we reconvene, we'll have that conversation. So we'll be back at 11. Hi, everyone. So I had a few minutes to, let's go ahead and reconvene at 11:03. So I had a few minutes to chat with the staff, and I want to propose or or at least lay out, I think, what the options are in front of us, which is we can continue to have this discussion, and see if we can come to a resolution on this piece of the report. We can, so that's one thing that we could do. We could create an ad hoc subcommittee to have a conversation with the staff about this piece of the report, and engage that way. So those are the two, I think, the two options that are in front of us. Commissioner Che.
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge, yeah, just how difficult this is and how this is impacting everyone individually. I did have a friendly amendment to what you've shared, and I appreciate Chair Roybal, you working with the staff. And it is a bit of an adaptation to Chair Damsky, not Chair, Commissioner Damsky's proposal, which is if we acknowledge different perspectives with this note that even within the various communities, there is not one perspective, like even within the Jewish community and the Palestinian community. So to recognize the diversity within the community, within communities. And there's so many aspects of in terms of the diversity. But I think that approach may work in the sense that you know, on so many issues, we have to acknowledge diverse perspectives, and that our job, I think, is to lift up the fact that that is affecting the state of hate in this country. And so I think that would be really important, including historical context. And I do feel as though some kind of a working group to because this isn't going to be the last of it, right? I think is how we navigate these times. But I do really appreciate how respectful everyone is with each other and acknowledging the hurt and harm that's generational. And if not us, how can we you know, how can we expect, you know, this work to move forward? So appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Filer.
Thank you. I actually do like, and I don't know how everyone feels, I do think putting more of what Commissioner Damsky recommended, the truth of that there are these two very different perspectives that are out there, and that maybe our responsibility in this commission for our governor to understand that that is what is going on, you know, and part of our report is to move that forward of what is going on in our state and how that is affecting the communities and has created more hate. You know, and I do think, and Commissioner Levin, you brought this up, I do think that the acknowledging of the intergenerational pain that all communities are experiencing is really important in understanding this this conflict and the level of hate that's happening that is so challenging for all of us to navigate together.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Levin.
I'm sorry, what was your first option? There were two options. One was to have an ad hoc committee. How about a dictionary? Why don't we just get out a dictionary? What was the other, what was the first option though?
The first option was for us to continue to have this conversation now.
Yeah, let's do it now. We're modeling for the rest of the country now. We have to outsource to the dentist for some bite plate or something. No, I think we have competent people who are appointed duly by the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor to make these kind of decisions. Now, by the way, I recognize that this can be changed at the highest levels. But we have a proposal by a duly appointed commissioner about changing language. I mean, I guess we could have an ad hoc committee, but it almost seems Monty Python-esque. Maybe there's something we don't know, but when it's like, could we have something where we say Israeli military response? I looked up both offensive, I looked up response. I mean, do we really have to get to? I understand, but it gets to a point where we have facts and we have the same access to dictionaries and news sources as other people. This does not seem to me to be like so it seemed to me that the word that was most causing pain for folks, and this is where I want to start at, right? I want to combine both, making sure that you can, what do they say? You can be right or you can be married. Right. In other words, what I'm saying is that we have to be able to have some elasticity for feelings in addition to being accurate and how we do that. In other words, what I was saying about in relationships, sometimes instead of being mechanistic, you have to be elastic for people who are under 60. But why can't we vote on some kind of compromise proposal? Because I can understand after listening, and what it is, we're modeling here. After listening, saying, well, we were attacked on October 2nd. I got it. So response, I think, is also a neutral word. Israel identifies who is the respondent. It was a military response. Why can't we vote on that? What kind of greater depth will we get from having an ad hoc committee about 3 words? Maybe I'm wrong, but I want to hear from other people, sincerely.
Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to thank Commissioner Che and our chair and our staff for putting some options before us. I feel neutral about the options. But what I want to highlight, a couple of things. One is, as Commissioner Levin was talking about earlier, the maturing of our commission. I experienced this conversation, which is a very hard one for many of us, as exemplifying the trust that we have come to place in each other, that we can say what's in our hearts and in our minds. I think that's really quite impressive. I also want to acknowledge, and I have said this privately to staff on one occasion, maybe more than one occasion, that we have a few members of the Jewish community on this commission and 1 member representing the Muslim community on this commission. And I noticed that. And so I see you, Commissioner Sinar, and I appreciate your courage in speaking in behalf of the Palestinian voice and concern here. And if we were to vote on this today, I would like to vote on it with placing I don't know what to say. Maybe we can submit it to the governor's office with a message saying that we're still working on this section. I don't know if that's possible, but perhaps we can do that. But I do think this section needs some more work. And I don't think it is ready to submit to the governor without that kind of a comment. And how we get about putting that sort of comment or elaborating in this section is not clear to me at this point. But those are my thoughts at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Commissioner Sinar.
I wanted to thank Commissioner Damsky just for the comment you just made. I really appreciate that. I just will say a few words of appreciation before talking about this issue in particular. Just also want to acknowledge Commissioner Che's contribution and thoughts on all of this. Commissioner Filer for acknowledging just how deeply felt these issues are and the generational trauma for multiple communities. And also Commissioner Levin for his continuing effort to put forward the perspectives and the harm affecting multiple communities here. I don't know that I would be prepared to vote on a draft of the report at this point. I'm not sure, for example, about Commissioner Levin's kind of amendment to my suggested amendment. I would want to think about that. I think so I think if we had to decide between the options, much as and perhaps none of us like further subcommittees and delegating out, I almost feel like that might be the only decision we might be able to come to right at this moment. So that is where I am leaning now. Yeah, I think I had another point, but I've lost it. So I'll just end it for now there.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Filer.
Oh, I actually remembered my other point. I don't know if I can have another
Go
moment.
ahead.
But it's just to say that in terms of my own sort of positionality, I am Muslim American, I'm South Asian. I cannot claim to speak for the Palestinian people or Palestinians in general or Arab Americans in California. So I just want to be clear that I'm not speaking in a representational capacity. That said, I certainly am often in dialogue with people who are Palestinian and from whom I've heard firsthand about how they are experiencing this moment. So I just want to share that I think, and partly why I think I would want to not make a decision right now is that I want to think a little bit more about the language, even the language of response. I think the important thing for us to do is to settle on descriptive language that does not get into questions about the historical origins or the who started or who acted and who's acting in response and who's acting, affirmatively. I think that is often where these discussions get charged. And I've certainly heard Palestinians say that in talking about the current conflict, although I think no one would disagree that October 7th is the moment of this current escalation, I don't know that anyone would say that that is the origin or starting point. And one point I've often heard is that, that this conflict has been ongoing much longer. There's a much greater history. And so I'm just conscious of how language about actions and response are heard from communities. And I'd like to think more about what is the descriptive language that can be accurate without making, which is fair and accurate. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Filer.
I think that I really do hear what Commissioner Sinar is saying. So I will make one comment, but I think she's correct in saying that we may need to think a little bit more about this. But if we're specifically saying October 7th, what Commissioner Levin said, that then it would be Israeli defensive response if we're doing that moment in time. But if we're looking at this in a larger context, it changes everything. But in the report, we were specifically saying October 7th. So for me, I could actually go to a vote and in looking at that line and the change of that one word, but I'm hearing from Commissioner Sinar, she's not sure that even that would be comfortable. So I think it may have to move into a subcommittee.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Are there any other comments about this, Commissioner Levin? Commissioner Levin, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I'm happy either way to pursue these options. What I think is also important is we're a public entity, and look at how we have matured. You know, we're setting something. That being said, I'm happy either way. I think really on situations like this, normally I'd say let's go for a vote. Because there is this efficiency side of things that we have in getting this out. But, you know, even if we arrive at the same thing we would have arrived on by vote in 30 seconds, I think if the commissioners want to have an ad hoc committee, in other words, this isn't any one commissioner's boat. We're all in the same boat. So I'm happy to have it go before an ad hoc committee. You know, but that being said, looked up on the dictionary. Response is a reaction to something. That doesn't negate anything, right? Yes, but we have to make sure that, again, even a careful lexiconic view, looking at dictionaries, all that. We have to meet people where they are. This is not this is a report for the residents of the state of California. And I think we have to show public transparency with respect to how we address these difficult things. If it were up to me, I'd vote on it now, but it's not. And when you're a member of a group, I think you have to defer. So should we put the options up for a vote instead? What is the most democratic option? I'll defer to my other commissioners, but perhaps we should put elementally, should we go for a vote now, or should we go for option to an ad hoc subcommittee? And I think it's important, as that editor told my son, as I listen more, the more I can take in and possibly adjust where I'm from. And we're modeling this. So I say, let's put up the options for a vote then. But again, I'll defer to my fellow commissioners, who I care for very much.
Well, I have thank you, Commissioner Levin. But before we get to you, Commissioner Feiler, I guess it would be helpful to know by a show of your hands, if we were to have an ad hoc committee, who would want to be a part of that? Commissioner Feiler, I see you. Commissioner Sonar, Commissioner Che. Okay, thank you. So I want to just put this aside for a second to see if there, I mean, the report is this is an important part, but the report has a lot of other sections. So do folks have other comments about other parts of the report, just by a show of hands? Okay, so there's no other comments or edits, input around the other parts of the report at this moment. Now, if something comes up later, you could certainly reach out to the staff around that. If you, in your second, this is like some light reading, we know, as you're perusing the report further and things come up, you should definitely feel free to reach out to Alec and the staff if you have something that comes up that did not come up here. But it looks to me like, or sounds like to me, that that we're good with the rest of the report except for this particular piece. So I think the options before us are, it does not sound to me like the commission is ready to make a decision right now. I will say that, given the comments, that we want a little bit more time. So if there is interest in doing an ad hoc, we can certainly do that. And I just want to kind of put out what some of the realities are. It will delay how this report gets to the governor's office, which is fine. I want to second what Commissioner Levin said earlier, is that we want to make sure that we're setting our own rules and our own deadlines. And we're trying to mirror the process that we did last year, and I think all of us were frustrated with the amount of time it took for the governor's office to review the report. Hopefully that concern has been communicated to the governor's office, so hopefully that there will be a tighter turnaround. So I think our options are to either to create the ad hoc or to continue this conversation and make a decision here. But again, I feel like that second part to me is not, it doesn't feel like the commission is actually in the place to be able to do that. So are there any kind of thoughts about what I have just laid out? Do folks feel like the ad hoc committee is the way to go? Just by a straw poll, a show of hands, or not an official vote? Okay.
Also, Chair, I'm sorry, you didn't get to see, I had my hand up for being on that ad hoc committee, and I just want to make sure that the other items relating to the recent reports on anti-Muslim victimizations, anti-Jewish victimizations, the mention that we're having records and appropriate disclaimers, and actually perhaps extracting out data which we think is the most accurate.
I think the staff has those notes from before, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure,
Right.
just because it wasn't meant, you said that this was the only thing. So I just wanted to make sure. And again, just Chair, thank you for being you.
Thank you. Commissioner Filer.
Yes, just a couple questions. I did mention that, and I don't know if this is part of the committee, the ad hoc committee we're going to make, that there are incidents of violence that happen to Jewish students, that is added to the report. And how would it work? Because there's 4 of us for an ad hoc committee, and I know that becomes.
Well, anything that whenever there are more or 3 commissioners or more that discuss commission business, that needs to be properly noticed. So it will have to be a public meeting. So those are, if there are more than 2 folks, then it needs to be properly noticed and the public invited to the meeting.
I'm happy to drop off if it brings us down to 2, but I don't think it does.
We're at 4 and we need your voice in this. No, I think if we're going to do it properly, it's just a matter of, I was just asking in terms of process. I thought there were certain guidelines if there's more than 2 of us.
There is, and in order to do that, then we would need to publicly notice the meeting 10 days in advance. We need to produce an agenda. The staff would have to put that together. Deputy Director Watts, is that something that's possible?
Certainly possible. I mean, I think in the interest of kind of expediency and having really in-depth conversations, I think if we can keep it to 2, that would be really ideal. I think that can help us really do some really careful editing, trading drafts back and forth in a lot more efficient manner than what we've had to do with this draft. So I'd recommend if we can get it down to 2, that would be great.
Commissioner Che?
I'm happy to step back if that would allow for free to move forward.
So that would mean that Commissioner Filer and Commissioner Sinar would form the ad hoc subcommittee. Are the 2 of you good with that? All right, so then we will create, do we need to have a motion or that, or can I just do that as the chair, Alec? I can't remember if I can establish ad hoc committees.
Why don't we just move then, sir?
All right, so can someone make a motion to establish, well, let me give you some guidelines before I make the motion, that we have an ad hoc committee that the chair will appoint, that is time limited, right? So over the next month, probably. And that will work with the staff on this particular section of the report. Is there someone who would like, Commissioner Sinar?
Just as we've been talking, I've been wondering whether returning again to this question of, is there some descriptive language that we could all agree on today? And I wonder if I might just throw out another option and see if that's something
Sure.
that would be possible. And if it's not something that people feel prepared to vote on, then we could go back to what we've been discussing. Is that, would that make sense to do now, or?
Sure.
Okay, all right. Well, the original reason that I thought of the phrase offensive is because the other term that is routinely used in the media is Israeli invasion, which is also an accurate description of the military actions. And the, you can quibble about, there's a ground invasion versus, bombardment and so on. But if we are okay with sort of not focusing too much on exactly when there was the ground invasion versus the earlier military actions, then I would recommend we could just say, keep the wording as is, but instead of subsequent escalation of conflict in the Middle East, we would say, and the Israeli invasion of Gaza, 4 words. And so that is descriptive. I think it is not counter to anyone's version of the facts. It doesn't frame it as either an offensive or defensive move, because that seems to be the language that is of concern to people, whether we call it offensive. I think you'll find the same objections to calling it a response, because then it suggests that all the actions that have taken place over 6 months are purely responsive to something, which is probably not the framing that I think people would see in terms of the scope of that military action. So that would be my suggestion. I think it is a factual one that avoids characterizing as offensive or defensive, and tries to kind of hew to description.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Adamski?
Thank you, Chair. I forgot what my original point was that I raised my hand for before Commissioner Sinar's most recent comment. I like the idea of moving ahead with the ad hoc subcommittee. I think the Commissioner Sinar's most recent suggestion would lead us down a path of another lengthy discussion here in this meeting. I am not partial to the word invasion. I don't think that's an improvement. And so I'd like to see, oh, I remember what my question was. My question was, once the ad hoc committee does its work, will they then bring the results of their work back to this commission before we submit our report to the governor? Thank you.
I think that will, I think if they're able to resolve the issue with the staff, then I don't necessarily think that needs to be brought back to the full commission. But if things cannot be resolved, then I think the commission will need to actually have a vote and take action on the language.
Thank you.
Commissioner Filer?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm actually, unfortunately, Commissioner Sinar, comfortable with the word invasion. I would have been comfortable if we were voting on Israeli response or defensive action. I guess that puts us back to a ad hoc committee. Because I can't comfortably say that language works.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. So going back then to the ad hoc committee, is there, based upon what I said in terms of the scope and membership of it, is there a motion to create the ad hoc committee?
Chair, I will make that motion.
Moved by Commissioner Damsky, seconded by Commissioner Levin. Before we go to a vote, is there any further discussion from the commissioners? And then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you, commissioners, for the way we've conducted this. This is a model for what universities should be doing, what legislatures should be doing. Just briefly, did you notice? There were no personal insults. There were no stereotyping. There was no not recognizing the horrendous grief that people are processing as we're doing what appears to be a lexiconical exercise, but it's really important. So, you know, I'm sorry. I'm like your aunt that like is always in the stands. But for these commissioners and for the staff who are working so hard, thank you. And no matter what we create, this process, and indeed, thank you, Commissioner Damsky, for your suggestion about the perspectives. This is how consensus is built. This is how hate is fought. And this is how all residents in California know that we're concerned about you. So thank you all, and especially Chair for just the magic dust of kindness that you run these meetings with. Thank you, Chair Roybal.
Thank you. Some people might call that fairy dust, Commissioner Levin. Let's move to any public comments on this item. Monica, is there any public comment?
No public comment at this time.
All right, see no public comment, we will move to a vote. Alec, will you call the roll?
Sure. I think we do need to check on public comment with Shanna too.
Oh, Shanna, is there any public comment in Los Angeles?
There is no public comment.
Thank you, Shanna. All right, Alec, let's move to a vote.
Okay, thank you. Chair Roybal,
Aye.
Vice Chair Salcedo, Commissioner Che,
Aye.
Commissioner Cuellar, Commissioner Damsky,
Aye.
Commissioner Filer,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Sonar,
Aye.
Commissioner Suthers. 6 ayes.
All right, that motion passes to create the ad hoc committee, which has a time limit of 30 days to work with staff. I am appointing to that ad hoc committee Commissioners Filer and Commissioner Sonar. Please, the staff will reach out to you to schedule that time. So thank you. Before we leave the report section, I just one more time see if there's comments or feedback about any of the other parts of the report before we move to our next agenda item, which is committee reports. All right, thank you. And thank you again to all of you for modeling good communication with one another. I know that these issues are very personal and as well as important for us to talk about. So I thank you for bringing your full selves to that conversation. And I know we will get to resolution eventually around it. And thank you to Commissioners Filer and Sonar for being on the ad hoc committee. Let's move on to chairs and subcommittee updates and discussion. I'll start with the chair's report. I do want to, as we are in the time of Passover, I want to wish a happy Passover, happy Pesach to all of those of you who are celebrating that. I'm also happy to announce that the Civil Rights Department, as I said earlier, has hired Dr. Kevin D. Thomas as a research data specialist to support the commission. Kevin could not be with us today, but will provide a formal introduction at the next commission meeting. I want to welcome Kevin. He has a very interesting specialty around media and marketing and to diverse communities. Like it is, I've been on a couple of meetings with him already, and I think he's a great addition to our team. And we'll make sure that you get bioinformation about Dr. Thomas. I also want to report that the day after the last commission meeting in May, I appeared at the Racial Equity Commission meeting. The California Racial Equity Commission was established by the governor by executive order. It met in Delano. And for those of you who are not familiar with Delano, Delano is a special place in terms of farm worker organizing. It is where that kind of began. And I was honored to be on a panel with a co-founder of the United Farm Workers, Dolores Huerta. I said during the panel that it was like a lifelong dream. It was like one of the most, it was like one of the greatest honors of my life to be on a panel with Dolores Huerta, someone who's been a mentor to me over many years. And I told Dolores that day that, like, in every decade of my life since my teens, I've actually had some interaction with her. I actually have photos in my office of us, like, basically every 10 years that we like have our paths have crossed in some way. So it was wonderful to get to hear from her. She just celebrated her 94th birthday and is still organizing, still doing lots of work around the school to prison pipeline that's happening for a lot of young Black and brown folks in California, and continuing to champion organizing. And so it was great to be with her. And the work of the Racial Equity Commission is very important in our state. They are about as old as us and have just kicked off their work doing community forums. So they were in Delano to do this meeting and community forum. And they have expressed interest in doing a joint meeting, a joint community forum or community meeting with us in the future. So we're going to be talking with them about that. But it was a great meeting, and their work is really going to be critical to us and for us to work together to create a California that is free from hate incidents and violence. I also just want to remind folks that we have our next community forum on May 11th at 1:30 p.m. In Shingle Springs in El Dorado County. And I want to thank the subcommittee on community forums, and in particular, Commissioner Cuellar, who is with us today, who'll be hosting us at Shingle Springs. I'm excited for those of you who have not been to the Rancheria to get to see all the incredible work that the tribe is doing there. And Commissioner Filer will talk more about the community forum during that subcommittee report. And then, of course, as Alec mentioned earlier, the United Against Hate Week is coming up this year. It will take place between September 21st and September 27th. We'll provide the link in the chat. And we encourage everyone to sign up about events and actions in your area. And to that note, you'll see that my background changed during the meeting today. It mirrors Deputy Director Monroe's, which is about California versus hate. And as we do at every commission meeting, we just want to remind everyone that if you feel you are a victim of a hate crime or incident, you can contact California versus Hate Resource Line to report the incident and to be connected with resources. We will put the link to the chat in as well. You can reach that at CAVSHATE.org, or you can call the number that's just above me, or you can also call 311 in California, or sorry, 211 in California to get connected to resources. Let's move. So as we move on to the subcommittee reports, I just want to remind commissioners to keep your updates high level and to try to take only 3 to 5 minutes to allow time for discussion. This will ensure the commission has time to ask questions and discuss your updates. We will start with the subcommittee on data and research. Commissioner Sinar.
Thank you. So I will keep this very brief because most of our projects are just at this point a continuation of projects that we have already briefed the commission about. The one that we've had some further discussion of in particular is a research convening with the UCLA Institute for the Study of Hate. And we are still at the beginning stages of conceptualizing what exactly that would look like, what form it would take. But the broad idea there is to bring academic researchers into the same space as policy folks at a minimum, those from CRD, to talk about practical policy initiatives and recommendations that can flow from the research. The one question that we wanted to present to the group and for folks to maybe just let us know afterwards might be the easiest way, but if there are community-based researchers that we should be in contact with who are both have the expertise and are involved with research, but are doing participatory research in close collaboration or connection with communities, we would love to have names of people that we should be in contact with. And again, the size of the convening, the form, all of that is still very much subject to discussion. So it's not so much that we are looking at this point for a list of attendees, but more that we want to make sure that we are at least in communication with a broader group of people at this stage. So I don't know if, can I, rather than having people like put names in the chat right now, would it be easiest for them to just communicate that with the staff afterwards? Is that appropriate?
Yes.
All right, so that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sinar. Let's move on to the subcommittee on policy recommendations and best practices in other jurisdictions. Commissioner Che.
Yes, thank you. I'm also going to be very brief in the interest of time. Given our earlier discussion, this is really for informational purposes. We are going to be taking up the issue of the evolving situation across campuses. Obviously, I know many of you have been following what's happening across the country, and most recently with USC. One can argue that free speech and campus safety have been long-standing issues, but of course, I know we need to recognize that that has been intensified recently. And I think this goes to the commission's role, which is what can we learn about the role of institutions and places of higher learning, in particular, potentially escalating or causing further harm. And of course, this hasn't happened yet in California, but there are some concerns about deploying law enforcement in response to protest. I think we can all agree that the safety and security of Jewish, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian students to be physically safe in their learning environment, but also in political thought. So just wanted to raise that for informational purposes and look forward to sharing more.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Sinar.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Che. I think it's an incredibly important issue. I just wanted to respond just to the factual statement about police not having been deployed on college campuses in California. In fact, they have been. At Stanford, there are 18 students who were criminally charged for disrupting a protest. This was their actions were disruptive, but in a nonviolent fashion, and the police was brought in as the police have been brought elsewhere in the country. So this question of the criminalization of protest is one that has already been at issue in California.
Thank you. The subcommittee on recommendations on law enforcement, Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. I believe Becky Monroe, our Deputy Director, Becky Monroe, is going to lead off this report, and then I will follow her.
That
A few
sounds
more
great.
words for us, Becky?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Damsky. And I this is a testament to all of the work our commissioners do. So, we had a 3-day sort of development of this training with Post. And because Commissioner Demansky is also on many other leadership roles, the very first day she wasn't able to be there. So my goal today was just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we did in that first day and kind of let you know where the training is and then turn it over to the commissioner. So, one of the things I want to highlight very quickly is just the work that Rebecca and Alec did to sort of get us in a place where we were ready for this training. So Rebecca really developed a comprehensive background memo that you all saw, I think, in advance of the training. And that very first day, it was incredibly helpful. We kind of used that memo as a guidance for sort of how to start the conversation, how to move forward. We also were able to identify participants for the training development. So that was another thing that I thought was very important about this piece, is that we were able to identify community groups, community leaders, and others. Post also did to participate in the training development. So just quickly, so folks know kind of who was in the room for those 3 days. So Commissioner Adamski was there, with the exception, of course, for the first day when she had to work on another government commission. And then we had California Black Media was in the room. We also had someone who, Cynthia Deedle, who is used to be an FBI special agent, was the civil rights unit chief at the U.S. Department of Justice back when I was there. And I got to know her when she led the implementation of the Shepard-Byrd Act. She's also a former programs director for the Matthew Shepard Foundation. So Cynthia was in the room. We had the police chief from Walnut Creek. We had a detective from LAPD who is the hate crimes coordinator. We had representatives from the Islamic Networks Group, ADL, AAPI Equity Alliance, CHIRLA, and I'm gonna make sure I'm getting everyone. The Post director actually came for the very first day as well, Manny Alvarez, just to sort of emphasize why this was important to them as well. And then there were also Post staff in the room that were helping to facilitate the sort of development of the training. So very quickly, again, that training outline that was developed did reflect the insight and sort of the request of community members as well that were in the room. It's going to talk about the new obligations under AB 449 for officers, including the importance of adopting training on their hate crimes policies. So adopting new hate crimes policies, adopting training on hate crimes policy. One of the things to highlight that we discussed a lot during the first day was a recognition that currently law does not require that law enforcement agencies collect hate incident data in addition to crime data, but the law enforcement representatives in the room think it's very important to collect that data. So this training, which I haven't really seen done a lot before, will emphasize why incident data collection is important. It's important to respond effectively to people who are targeted for hate crimes and hate incidents, and sort of why, from the officer's perspective, they're going to talk about why they think it's important, and we and the community is going to also share that perspective. So right now, where we are, just real quickly, we're identifying people that the community groups in the room thought it was important to hear directly from people who've survived hate crimes. So they are identifying folks. We currently, I think, we are very fortunate. Commissioner Salcedo is going to speak. One of the things, I know Commissioner Salcedo is not on the call. I wanted to recognize, unfortunately, Commissioner Salcedo is very familiar with acts of hate. Trans Latina was just recently targeted for bomb threats. So I think, she just continues to do extraordinarily critical work. And so I want to first also acknowledge her and her staff and gratitude. She's going to speak on this webinar, on this brief training. California Black Media has also identified someone to speak about, the way anti-Blackness is showing up in terms of hate crimes. We are also working with AAPI Equity Alliance and have identified someone who's willing to speak there. So I think we're moving forward, and I will turn it back over to the commissioner.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. So I wanted to include her report because she did attend the first day of the meeting with Post, which I had to miss for my excuse me, my elected position. And so that adds some context that I didn't have as a commissioner on the subcommittee, talking about what the work of Post has looked like and how it started. So there were some questions that came up in our last meeting I wanted to address. One was about how does Post oversee and or train tribal law enforcement? So the answer to that is that tribal law enforcement officers, the answer for whether or not their training and reporting requirements fall under the requirements of Post, the answer is it depends. Generally, they don't fall under the umbrella of Post unless they are also cross-designated as reserves of their local sheriff's department. So they would receive that training from the Post participating agency. So some may fall under Post umbrella and some will not. Tribal law enforcement does not fall under Post training guidelines, even though some choose to follow their perishable skills guidelines in some areas. Excuse me. The second question I was asked was to follow up on whether Post provides a continuing education certification or whether another agency does that. Who keeps track of who has seen the video and where is that data stored? And do officers receive credits for watching the video? And if so, how many? So the answer to that was Post certifies the curriculum for continuing professional training. The presenters of the training, in other words, Post presenters, include law enforcement agencies, educational institutions, and private presenters. Post-certified curriculum provided by a Post presenter is tracked by Post through their own software, and each learner has a profile on that software showing which courses they have completed. Some of the courses involve watching videos. The credits awarded for watching the video content depends on the length and type of course. Generally, courses are awarded 2 or more hours of continuing professional training when they require that number of hours to complete the course. For a short video like this one, 15 minutes or less, there will be no continuing professional training awarded. I want to see if there's anything I wanted to add to the update that Deputy Director Monroe provided. There's been a lot of emails going back and forth between the Post people, the video staff, and our subject matter experts in the last 10 days. There was a deadline on Monday to submit recommendations for interviewees to be featured in the video, and I've not heard an update from there about where we currently stand. So there may be other folks coming forward. We are on schedule to begin our first meeting for actually putting these videos together next week on April 30th. And there will be 4 days of work on that. And that is my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. Commissioner Sinar.
I had one question maybe for Becky about this question of collection of law enforcement of hate incident data. And I know that in the report, we were also discussing whether or not we want to, affirmatively call for that or not take a position at this time. And so I wanted to see what your perspective was, since it sounds like yours and Commissioner Damsky, since this is in connection with the training as well. But in general, my sense, and coming from the perspective of being a civil rights lawyer, is often that I don't want to see law enforcement agencies collecting and retaining more data than they need because of both privacy concerns and concerns around how that information can be used for future profiling or other efforts. So in general, the idea of greater law enforcement data collection, especially when it is not in relationship to crime, is something that I have concerns about. And then second, in terms of thinking about alternative sources for data collection, including California versus Hate, my instinct would be to say that perhaps law enforcement agencies, rather than collecting that data themselves, if they've determined that no crime has been involved, perhaps having folks instead contact California versus Hate, which can then both collect the data and offer other kinds of supportive resources, might be the better move than to be training and encouraging law enforcement agencies to do that directly. I have not thought about this issue, I'm sure, nearly as much as others have, but that I do have these reservations about promoting greater collection of non-crime hate incident data by law enforcement. So I would love to hear more thoughts about that.
I share your concerns, I think, about sort of expanding sort of the mandate of what law enforcement must do. I think what we're doing here, and I think the other thing I should have highlighted that we're very happy about is they really are going to promote California versus Hate through the video as well, to say this is a resource for you. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of incidences, there's the first piece about if someone reports that you get them support. So the question, and I think you're making a really important distinction that we need to be very clear about, is part of what we heard from community members, and including the folks that were in the room, was how devastating it is if someone actually gets up the courage to report to law enforcement. And maybe of course we hope they'll come to us too, but if for some reason they do go and then the law enforcement says that's not even a crime, like and just sort of like turns them away. So there's a couple of things that could happen there. One is they could in fact connect the person with resources, like they could say this sound, so there's a service provision, which is that is a horrible, I understand that this caused a lot of pain. It does not violate criminal laws as we understand. Here's a resource for you. So in terms of more effective response to incidents, that's one in of itself. And to your point, maybe that's where they end it and they say, go to California versus Hate. There is, and I know within LAPD, they're collecting some of this incident data, although it varies who's collecting it. That when people report, they're capturing it, and that I think the question is sort of what do they do with it? So that's the second piece of it. In terms of what this training is encouraging people to do, it is encouraging folks to say hate incidents matter. So even if it's not a crime, you need to recognize it causes significant harm in a community, and you as a law enforcement agent, you are a representative of the government. It is your obligation, just as is everyone in the government, to connect people with resources. We're not taking the position that, and I was speaking a little sloppily earlier, there's not going to be like, you all should collect this data as incident data. There is absolutely you all should make sure if someone has the guts to report to you that you're actually connecting them with support. The training is also, and I think this was discussed in the last one, is directed primarily at line officers. It's going to be directed at all law enforcement, but that's sort of the audience for this particular training. Maybe there will be other trainings where we could also sort of expand the office, but for this one of the reasons it's important that we include California versus Hate is we are trying to sort of, this is a tool, this could be a tool for you if you cannot respond effectively because it's not a crime, to actually not leave somebody who needs help without something. So if they come to you, the message I think that we landed on in the group was no one should leave empty-handed if they report an act of hate. But that could mean just connecting with us. So I think your caution is very well put, and it's it's a short training. It definitely doesn't go as far as to say everyone should require it, but it does have officers and it has a detective and the chief saying this is why incidents matter, and that not effectively responding to them actually undermines our trust. And in fact, although we're still finalizing it, I believe one of the people who will be speaking is going to speak about how law enforcement did not respond effectively to an incident, did not sort of take it seriously in the way that would have actually connected her with resources, then went back and fixed it, but is going to highlight the damage that was done because, just talking about the fact that the next time something did happen, she will no longer, she wouldn't have trusted to report it.
I'd like to add something to that. One important piece that was discussed during our meetings was that if data on hate incidents is recorded, then the perpetrator, when they do similar things in the future, there's a way of tracking them and elevating or making more of a case for prosecuting their actions as a hate crime. Whereas if we don't keep records of their incidents, it's much harder to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Adamski. Commissioner Levin?
Thank you so much for covering this. Some places, as we've heard, that collect bias incident. Now, the FBI will use the term criminal incident, but we're talking about non-criminal incidents. Some other places include Portland, Seattle, Chicago, and elsewhere. There's a real difficulty that I have with what was just said. And again, the civil liberties guy coming out, and that is, I don't want precursor information that's not a crime being used later. So one of the things that has come up has been the suggestion of scrubbing personal identifying information, yet still keeping the data. So here's the conundrum, right? We'd prefer not to have like, a carceral approach to everything, right? But police are oftentimes the first point of contact. So counting these incidents also reflects like trends that we can examine, and it can also be helpful for where they occur and who they're targeted at, right? Like school children or something. So we're not in an absence of information. So if we're seeing incidents coming from schools and they don't rise to the level of crime, we can have some kind of intervention that doesn't involve punishment, right? So it is useful. One problem that we've had though, in places like New Jersey, when they've added bias incident data, it just explodes the whole system, because now what we're seeing is New Jersey taking incidents that aren't crimes and kind of making them crimes. There's confusion because of lack of training. But what my question would be is, as a commission, we want to encourage, again, the no closed door policy. What I'd like to see is something where police departments, if they decide that something isn't a hate crime, to bring it to California versus hate.
Well, I think, yeah, and I'm so sorry, I just have to jump off to another call, but just
go.
No, but to be responsive to that, that's exactly what we're doing. Although we are not asking law enforcement to bring it, we think it's really important that the victim or the survivor maintain the agency. So what we are really emphasizing is give the person the resource, make sure they have the flyer so they can choose if they want to reach out to us, that they can do it. So rather than having like a law enforcement referral, that it's more, I mean, it's a law enforcement referral in the sense of giving them the resource, but that it's not law enforcement that's sending them to us. They are choosing to do that after they know what their options are. So I think I do really appreciate this conversation. I think it's very important to think about the civil liberties implications. It's just for these purposes, this is where we are. We know there are departments that are collecting it, and I think it's really important to think about sort of what are those protections that are in place. But for now, this is where we're going to focus. And sorry for speaking in my element, but I will jump off. It's good to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. All right, thank you, Commissioner Damsky, for that report. We'll move on to the subcommittee on community forums. Commissioner Filer.
Yes, well, I know Commissioner Cuellar could not be here, but I have to give her credit for and her staff for the public forum we're about to have on up at her reservation. I just wanted to tell you who will be speaking really quickly. Assemblymember James Ramos will be speaking to us. Morningstar Gall, who is the project director of Restoring Justice for Indigenous People, and we'll do a special presentation on the murdered and missing Indigenous people crisis that's going on. Also from the governor's office, we're going to have Christina Snelder, I hope I pronounced this right, Ashtarali, who is the Tribal Affairs Secretary. Loretta Miranda, who is the Deputy Tribal Affairs Secretary and Special Counsel, who will be in discussion about the California Truth and Health and Healing Council. I hope you all can make it. I think it's going to be a really interesting and important public forum. And then we're looking to do a public forum in fall with the Civil Rights Council.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. There is no report from the subcommittee on funding at this commission meeting. Is there any public comment on any of the subcommittee reports? Monica, any public comment?
No public comment.
Shanna, any public comment in Los Angeles?
There's no public comment.
Seeing no public comment, we'll move on to our next agenda item, commission member announcements. If you have any announcements, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Seeing no announcements, we'll move on to public comment. Oh,
Sorry.
Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be the first person, that's all, but thank you. Again, and I want to make sure this is okay. We might have to do it through Alec. But the White House Office on Science and Technology has invited me to speak on non-criminal and enhancing non-criminal reporting. Since that was just a topic, I just want to make sure, I'm so sorry that Becky had to leave. But if any of you have any input, and because it's not for the commission per se, I'm going to defer to the Civil Rights Department and our chair. But however is the most appropriate way to do it, please feel free. If you have suggestions or concerns on how to enhance this, please contact me. I talked to Commissioner Sinar on this, so as part of the data and research. But if there's anyone else, either on staff or commission, that would like to offer some perspective, please let me know. Also, as I said, recent reports just out showing significant increases in religion hate crimes, and we're seeing literally like every week. Just this morning, University of Massachusetts Amherst, kill all Arabs. At Cornell, where my son goes, kill all Jews. This is something that is developing in a way that I don't think people understand. And there is also, just released by the FBI director during testimony yesterday, where he is concerned for not just talking about college campuses. What I'm saying is the level of threat appears to be enhanced now. Look at his testimony, and you can evaluate it yourself. But I think, again, it's important to recognize what my friend Dr. Ibish wrote is we have these dual concerns with respect to civil liberties, and that is actually part of our statute that made our commission. And perhaps later on, maybe we can explore how better to protect both the interest in civil liberties and also the right of students to feel secure. Two things can be true at the same time. And I think to that end, if there's one thing that I want the commission to know and the residents of California is these folks here are the best of our state. And you can see how we are modeling how to resolve things. But I also really want to say to anyone, irrespective of what community you are from, at a time when we are seeing not only these multi-year or record highs in religion hate crimes, to know, and we talk about public messaging, through good fortune, all of us have become new public messengers. And I think it's key that we use these opportunities to, again, as our chair has done so beautifully, to let folks know you're not alone. If you are a victim of hate, call the number. I say 1-83-38 no hate, but I will go with whatever the commission votes for, 833-8 no hate. But please, one thing that, and you know, Becky's not here, so I can talk all kinds of dirt now. She has been devoted to this for so many years in her work in DC and then bringing it here. We're doing good, folks. We're doing good. And I want to thank again, every commissioner, every one of you, heartfelt, and the Civil Rights Department as well. Thank you for getting that we have an elastic mission. So again, please recognize to all those folks who feel scared, who feel that they're not being heard, we're listening. And I would hope that maybe later on, we could get some of the peaceful voices for interfaith of the kind that I've been involved with for decades to shed some light on things and also about how we can structure communities in ways where people come in with this comfort and sometimes ability to agree to disagree. We're building it here. We're demonstrating it. Chair Roybal, let me tell you something. Leadership starts with you. You have done such a marvelous job, and I will tell you more when I take you out for lunch or dinner in the next week or two.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Let's move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment in Los Angeles? Shanna,
There's no public comment.
thank you. Monica, is there any public comment either through email or in Zoom?
No public comment.
No public comment. Thank you. As a reminder, future agenda items can be sent to Deputy Director Watts and myself.
Looks like we have a comment that just came in on.
Oh.
Yep. Noel, we'll allow to talk.
Hello, Noel. Welcome. You have 3 minutes. Maybe they put their hand down, Monica. I don't see their hand up anymore. Noel, did you have a public comment? Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, perfect. My name is Noel Lapon. I'm a regional prevention coordinator with the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, Department of Homeland Security. Commissioner Levin and Dr. Southers are familiar with my supervisor and colleague down in Southern California. I just had a couple things. One, I want to acknowledge and appreciate the public discourse that you all had regarding the Israeli and Hamas situation, and providing a little bit of a sanity check for us as well, because we struggle with the same topics and verbiage. I think that the commission has well modeled how this is done for our community. The second is our mission is to prevent targeted violence and terrorism, and we do that through the public health informed approach. As such, we've partnered with Cal OES and California Department of Public Health to work primary, secondary, and tertiary measures in our region. And we look forward to reaching out to you all and providing some resources and finding other ways that we can partner. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Noel, for your public comment. Seeing no other public comments, we will, as a reminder, like I said before, future agenda items can be sent to Deputy Director Watts and myself for consideration in calendaring. And that will wrap up our commission meeting today. I want to thank all the commissioners for your understanding and your patience and your dialogue with one another today. Even when we have difficult conversations, I think we get to model for folks how we can have those conversations in the kindest ways possible, and making sure that we're honoring one another and our own experience and their own experiences. So thank you to everyone for doing that today. More to come as we look at our next commission meeting. I'll work with the staff in terms of determining whether or not we will cancel the May meeting, but you'll get that notice within the next week. To that end, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Damsky. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Filer. The meeting, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 The meeting is adjourned at 12:17 p.m. on Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. Thank you to the public for joining us and to the commissioners. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.